Let's start our conversation for Chapter 5 and 6 with the fundamentals of statistics. Whatever your degree happens to be, doesn't matter if it's English or art or history, there's going to be research that you're going to have to read, and within that research, there's going to be some statistical facts that might be conveyed. And so it's important to know the fundamentals and the basics of statistics so you will be able to interpret certain information in your particular field of study. So what we'll look at here is the process of a statistical study. We'll look at choosing a sample, types of statistical studies, and a thing called margin of error. So let's start with the process of a statistical study. We need to know some definitions given a new chapter, new content. So these are some of the terms we're going to use that you need to be familiar with. First, statistics. It's the science of collecting, organizing, and interpreting data. We can use charts and tables and graphs to represent that data. The word statistics also refers to the data that describe or summarize something. So we're just going to be talking about collecting, organizing, and interpreting some data. So here are some basic terms. We've got population and sample. So let's think about those. Population would be the entire population under study. Let's say I was studying UALR students. So the entire population of UALR students would be my population. So every student would be part of my population. But it's really hard to survey every member in a population. So what we do is we collect a sample or a subset of that population. So within that big population, we would pick a sample and we would survey that sample. And hopefully that sample would give us information where we could make inferences about the population. So you in this Math 1321 class, you guys would be a sample. So those members in this class would be a sample of the population of UALR students. So I think that helps keep those two terms straight. Now, the next two terms, a population parameter and a sample statistic. Let me go with sample statistic first. A sample statistic is the actual number describing the characteristics of that sample. So let's suppose I wanted to know the average age of UALR students. Then what I would do is I would ask everybody in this class, what is your age? And I would find your average age. That number that I would get, let's say the average age is 20. That number is called a sample statistic. It's the number I find for the sample. So let's say that sample has an average age of 20. That's the sample statistic. It's what I find out about that sample. The population parameter would be the numbers that describe the characteristics of the population. But again, since it's hard to sample an entire population, what we would use is we would say, hey, here's my sample statistic of 20. And if that sample was a good representative of the population, then that number would be used as the population parameter. Really, what we need to know here is just kind of getting down to the basics is I need you to know what population is, what sample is, and what a sample statistic is. That's what we're going to be working with. Now, the basic steps of a statistical study are important because you are going to use these exact same steps when you complete your final project. So these steps are important. And when you'll see when I give you when I hand out or actually email you your project, I will have these particular things that you'll need to do on your project. You'll need to state the goal of a study. So you're going to actually complete a study. So you'll have to state for me the goal of your study. You'll have to pick a representative sample from the population and survey that sample. You'll, collect some raw data and summarize the data by finding some sample statistics of interest. Basically, what are you interested in finding about that sample from the population? Then you'll actually make you'll have your sample statistics. It would infer the population. You will organize your data. You'll make charts and then draw some conclusions. So these are all important parts of a statistical study that you will be doing as part of your final project. You do not have to memorize any of these. We're just going to talk about them. So let's go back to that UALR example. Suppose I want to know what percentage of UALR students have a computer with internet access at home. And students were polled. The results were found by randomly selecting students who were in the library. And by polling these students in the library, it was found that 79% of the students stated that they had computer and internet access at home. So we have a population, that's UALR students. So that's the big set. Then we have a sample of students that we got from the library. So there is my sample. And in that sample, we found out that 79% of them had computer and internet access at home. Okay, so let's just identify what's the population. This picture kind of helps us. It's the UALR student body. What is the sample? The students in the library. What is the population parameter? Well, let's first go to the sample statistic. The sample statistic is that 79% have computer and internet access at home. That's the sample statistic. The population parameter is basically what we want to know about the population, and what we want to know about the population is the percentage of students with computer internet access. So the sample came up to be 79%. If that is a true unbiased sample, then we could say the population is 79%. 79% of all students, not just the students in the library, but 79% of all students have computer and internet access at home. Population, sample statistic. 1, 2, 3. Those are the guys we're after. Okay, so how are you going to choose a sample? Over here, it was convenient just to go to the library and choose some students who are in the library today and poll them. So that's kind of a convenience way of picking a sample. We have several ways of picking samples, and let's take a look at some things that we're going to do to pick some samples. But we have a couple of definitions to get out of the way. So our goal in picking our sample is to every now and then I'll have a couple of technical difficulties, so I have to pause, stop that error from occurring, and then come back and continue my recording. So anyway, definitions. We want to make sure our sample that we choose has all the relevant characteristics of the population. So the sample members are basically, the characteristics of the sample are generally the same as those of the population. So big key is we want a representative sample. Now, when we pick that sample, yes, it's going to represent the population, but we also want to make sure that there's no bias in the people or whatever we choose for our sample. So we don't want our sample to be biased. Biased means you might pick certain people to favor certain results. So if something is biased, it'll favor certain results. That is not what you want. You want it to be a representative sample that's unbiased. We want an unbiased sample. If we have that, then we can trust the statistics that we find from that. Okay, so how can I pick this sample? Well, one thing I can do is what I mentioned earlier, a convenience sampling. That means you're just doing what is convenient. You're at the grocery store, you ask some people. You're on Facebook, you ask some folks on Facebook. So it's convenient to select that particular subset of the population. So here's an example. Someone's just hollering out of the window at someone walking by. So it's convenient to do that. Convenience samples are probably not going to be unbiased. Okay, simple random sampling. Well, the word random means the people or the subjects in the study are chosen at random, which means each member has an equal chance of being selected. So everybody has the same chance of being selected. It's like the game of bingo. You know, you've got all the balls rolling in there. Every one of those balls has an equal chance of being chosen. So that's a simple random sample. Let's look at systematic, another way you could choose a sample. Systematic is like choosing every 5th or every 12th or every 7th item, maybe in a list. So suppose you had a list of phone numbers, and let's say the phone numbers were to all the faculty on campus. So you could systematically go and pick every 5th person on that list and call them to participate in a survey. Or you might be in the dorms and you knock on every 3rd dorm room door. There's a system and a systematic approach to that type of sampling. And then the last type that we're going to look at, the last sampling way to collect a sample is stratified sampling. And in stratified sampling, we're concerned about the differences among subgroups. So we separate into subgroups, then we draw random samples from each subgroup. Here's an easy way to remember that. I could divide the population that I'm looking at into both females and males. Okay, so I'm, as it says right here, I'm putting this in subgroups, or sometimes called strata. So my 2 subgroups are females and males. And then within the females, I will draw some folks at random. Within the males, I'll draw some folks at random. That's stratified. We break it into subgroups. Tell you what I'll do. I will stop this video here. And let's do these 4 and then I'll stop the video. So I want you to read these 4, pause the video, figure out what sampling method they used, and then start the video back to see if you were correct. So here are the sampling methods that were used. Conducting a survey in the dorm room, knocking on every 10th room, systematic. And actually, I'm going to run out of video in 10 seconds, so I'm going to have you look at that. I'm going to end the video here and start the next one with this topic.